In the autumn of 1876, state investigators descended upon a sprawling estate in Brookfield, Massachusetts, following reports of screaming that had echoed across the countryside for 3 consecutive nights. What they discovered inside the Pemberton family mansion defied every principle of medical science, human decency, and rational explanation that the 19th century could offer. 17 patients were found in various states of psychological and physical transformation that no legitimate medical procedure could account for. 6 more had simply vanished, leaving behind only blood-stained clothing and personal effects scattered throughout chambers that bore no resemblance to any known medical facility. Most disturbing of all, the remaining evidence suggested that whatever had occurred within those walls represented not medical treatment, but something far more sinister, something that modern science, even with all our advances, still cannot adequately explain. The official records were immediately sealed by federal authorities and remain classified for over a century. Tonight, we reveal the suppressed testimony, the hidden correspondence, and the physical evidence that government officials deemed too dangerous for public knowledge. Please like and subscribe and comment below. With where you're watching from, we want to know how far this story reaches. What makes the Pemberton case particularly chilling is not what we've learned in the 150 years since, but what we still cannot comprehend. In an era when medical science has mapped the human genome, performed brain surgery with robotic precision, and transplanted human hearts, the phenomena documented at the Pemberton estate remain as inexplicable today as they were to the horrified investigators who first witnessed them. The Massachusetts of 1876 was a state caught between the rational optimism of the Industrial Revolution and the lingering shadows of Puritan mysticism. Gas lamps were replacing candles in the cities, while telegraph lines carried news across vast distances with unprecedented speed. The medical establishment, flushed with confidence from recent discoveries about germ theory and anesthesia, believed that science would soon illuminate every dark corner of human experience. Yet this was also the height of the American spiritualism movement, when seances were conducted in parlors across New England and respected citizens claimed regular communication with the dead. The line between scientific inquiry and supernatural investigation had never been more blurred, creating an atmosphere where ambitious researchers might pursue knowledge through methods that civilized society would never openly sanction. Into this world of competing worldviews stepped Dr. Cornelius Pemberton, a man whose credentials seemed impeccable, but whose true nature would prove to be something far more complex and terrifying than anyone in the quiet town of Brookfield could have imagined. Dr. Cornelius Pemberton arrived in Brookfield in the early spring of 1868, accompanied by his wife Eleanor and their 3 adult children, twins Marcus and Miriam, both 28, and their younger sister Lydia, 26. The family's credentials were impressive and thoroughly documented. Dr. Pemberton held degrees from both Harvard Medical School and the University of Edinburgh, while Eleanor claimed ancestry among Boston's most prominent Puritan families. Their wealth appeared unlimited. Within weeks of their arrival, they had purchased the largest estate in the county, nearly 400 acres of rolling hills and dense woodland, complete with a colonial mansion that had stood empty for over a decade. The previous owners, the Blackwood family, had abandoned the property following a series of unexplained deaths that had claimed 3 generations within 5 years. Local superstition held that the land was cursed, but Dr. Pemberton dismissed such notions with the confidence of a man who believed science could explain any mystery. The family's integration into Brookfield society proceeded with calculated precision. Dr. Pemberton immediately established a private practice specializing in what he termed disorders of the feminine mind and spirit, while Eleanor organized charitable committees to aid local widows and orphans. Marcus Pemberton, claiming expertise in pharmaceutical chemistry, opened an apothecary that quickly became indispensable to the community. Miriam devoted herself to teaching Sunday school with an enthusiasm that impressed even the most devout church elders. Only Lydia remained somewhat apart from the family's public activities, though her rare appearances in town invariably attracted attention. Possessed of an ethereal beauty that seemed almost otherworldly, she moved through social gatherings with a grace that enchanted men and women alike. Yet there was something unsettling about her presence. Conversations grew quieter when she approached, and even the most confident citizens found themselves stammering in her company. The reconstruction of the Pemberton estate began immediately and proceeded with an urgency that puzzled local contractors. Dr. Pemberton insisted on modifications that seemed excessive for a private residence: reinforced foundations that could support industrial machinery, soundproofing between rooms that rivaled concert halls, and a ventilation system more sophisticated than anything found in Boston's finest hospitals. Most unusual was the construction of an entirely new wing, connected to the main house by an underground passage that required extensive excavation. The workers hired for this project were brought in from distant cities and sworn to secrecy through contracts that included substantial financial penalties for discussing their work. When curious neighbors inquired about the purpose of these modifications, Dr. Pemberton explained that he intended to establish a private sanitarium for wealthy patients, requiring discreet treatment for nervous disorders. The basement levels of the new wing were particularly mysterious. Multiple rooms were lined with what appeared to be surgical tile, equipped with drainage systems capable of handling substantial liquid volumes, and fitted with gas lines that could provide both illumination and anesthesia. Each room contained restraint systems built into the walls and floors, with an engineering precision that suggested extensive planning and professional consultation. Dr. Pemberton's partnerships with local medical practitioners developed quickly, though always on terms that heavily favored the established physicians. He offered to handle their most difficult cases, women whose conditions had proven resistant to conventional treatment, for fees so modest that most doctors felt obligated to accept his assistance. In exchange, he asked only for detailed medical histories and the understanding that his methods, while unorthodox, were based on the latest European research. The first patients arrived in late 1868, typically delivered by family members who had exhausted all conventional treatments for conditions ranging from melancholia and hysteria to more serious disorders that threatened family reputations. Dr. Pemberton's success rate appeared remarkable. Within months, women who had been deemed incurably disturbed were returning to their families as model citizens of feminine virtue and domestic compliance. Word of these miraculous transformations spread throughout Massachusetts and beyond, bringing patients from increasingly distant locations. Wealthy families from New York, Philadelphia, and even Charleston began making the journey to Brookfield, drawn by testimonials that describe complete personality transformations achieved through methods that seemed to combine the best of modern medicine with profound spiritual insight. The first indication that something was fundamentally wrong at the Pemberton estate came from Jeremiah Walsh, a farmer whose property bordered the mansion's eastern boundary. Walsh, a practical man known for his skepticism of anything resembling superstition, began reporting strange phenomena in the summer of 1869, just over a year after the family's arrival. The sounds began as a low humming that drifted across his fields during the pre-dawn hours, sometimes accompanied by what sounded like machinery operating in underground chambers. Walsh initially assumed the Pembertons were installing modern conveniences, perhaps steam heating or mechanical ventilation systems that required nighttime operation. However, the sounds grew increasingly complex over time, incorporating rhythmic tapping, metallic grinding, and most disturbing of all, human voices engaged in what appeared to be ritualistic chanting. "It wasn't like any church service I ever heard," Walsh later testified to investigators. "The voices rose and fell in patterns that made my skin crawl, speaking words that didn't sound like English or any other Christian language. Sometimes there would be screaming mixed in with the chanting, but not the kind of screaming you'd expect from medical treatment. This was different, like the sounds an animal makes when it knows it's about to die." The visual phenomena were equally unsettling. Strange lights began appearing in the estate's windows during the darkest hours of night. Not the steady glow of gas lamps or candles, but flickering illumination that shifted through colors Walsh had never seen before. The lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with the underground machinery, creating patterns that suggested some kind of coordination between the visual and auditory disturbances. Thomas Hartwell, who operated the region's only commercial delivery service, began noticing unusual shipments arriving at the Pemberton estate with increasing frequency. The packages came from suppliers he didn't recognize, bearing return addresses from major cities, but also from remote locations throughout Europe and Asia. Most mysterious were the containers that required special handling: heavy wooden crates marked with symbols that resembled no conventional shipping codes, sealed with wax that bore unusual designs pressed into its surface. Dr. Pemberton always insisted on being present when these special deliveries arrived, Hartwell recalled. He would examine each crate carefully before accepting it, sometimes opening containers right there on the doorstep to verify their contents. I caught glimpses of what was inside some of them. Preserved specimens floating in glass jars, books bound in leather that looked ancient, and instruments made of metals I couldn't identify. The delivery schedule itself was strange, with most shipments arriving during twilight hours or after dark. Dr. Pemberton paid premium rates to ensure these unconventional delivery times, claiming that the sensitive nature of his medical supplies required protection from sunlight and temperature fluctuations. However, Hartwell noticed that the contents of these shipments often included items that seemed to have nothing to do with conventional medicine. The first concerned family members began voicing their worries in early 1870, though their complaints were initially dismissed by local authorities, who remained impressed by Dr. Pemberton's apparent success rate. Mrs. Catherine Morrison, whose daughter Agnes had undergone treatment for rebellious behavior, expressed alarm at the dramatic changes in her child's personality following her return from the estate. Agnes was always spirited, perhaps too spirited for her own good, Mrs. Morrison confided to her pastor. But the young woman who came home after 3 months with Dr. Pemberton wasn't spirited at all. She wasn't anything at all. She moved like a sleepwalker, spoke only when directly addressed, and showed no recognition of things that had once brought her joy. When I showed her the diary she had kept since childhood, she stared at the pages as if she had never seen them before. Similar concerns emerged from other families whose daughters had received treatment at the Pemberton estate. The transformed women displayed a disturbing uniformity in their behavior, perfect compliance with domestic duties, complete disinterest in intellectual pursuits, and an unsettling serenity that seemed more like emptiness than peace. Most troubling of all, many appeared to have gaps in their memories, unable to recall not only their time at the estate, but also significant periods of their lives before treatment. Dr. Pemberton's own behavior in public settings grew increasingly erratic as his practice expanded. Neighbors noted that he had developed nervous habits, constantly checking his pocket watch, muttering calculations under his breath, and displaying an obsessive interest in astronomical phenomena that seemed unrelated to his medical work. His conversations often drifted toward esoteric topics that made listeners uncomfortable, particularly his frequent references to advancing human evolution and unlocking the full potential of the feminine mind. The local children developed their own folklore about the estate, calling it the Screaming House and creating elaborate games based on their frightened imaginings of what occurred behind its walls. While adults dismissed these games as typical childhood fantasy, the consistency of the children's stories was remarkable. They all described seeing figures moving through the mansion's windows at night, silhouettes that seemed too tall and moved with motions that didn't appear quite human. Mary Caldwell, whose cottage stood closest to the estate's main entrance, began documenting her observations in a detailed journal that would later prove crucial to investigators. Her entries recorded not only the strange lights and sounds that others had reported, but also more subtle anomalies that suggested the estate's influence extended beyond its physical boundaries. "The animals won't go near the place anymore," she wrote in September 1870. "My chickens, which used to roam freely across the property line, now refuse to venture within 100 yards of the estate's fence. The neighborhood cats have all disappeared, and even the birds seem to avoid flying over the mansion. Most peculiar of all, the few animals that do stray too close return changed. My neighbor's dog came back from the estate grounds walking differently, as if it had forgotten how to be a dog." The pattern of patients arriving at the estate also became increasingly suspicious to observant residents. While some women arrived accompanied by family members who seemed genuinely concerned about their welfare, others were delivered under circumstances that suggested coercion rather than voluntary treatment. These patients often appeared drugged or restrained, and their escorts sometimes displayed the kind of business-like efficiency more associated with commercial transactions than medical referrals. The Macabre Mystery of the Pemberton Family, Sections 4 to 6. Section 4. The First Survivor's Account. Margaret Whitmore arrived at the Brookfield Sheriff's Office on March 15, 1872, in a state of near collapse. The 23-year-old daughter of a prominent Boston merchant family had fled the Pemberton estate on foot during a thunderstorm, running barefoot through 3 miles of forest driven by absolute terror. Margaret had been committed to Dr. Pemberton's care 6 weeks earlier for what her family termed excessive intellectual curiosity. Her escape testimony would provide the first detailed account of what actually occurred within the estate's walls. The basement goes down much deeper than the house should allow, Margaret told investigators, her voice trembling. There are levels beneath levels, connected by staircases carved into bedrock. Some chambers feel ancient, as if the Pembertons built their house on something that was already there. The treatment rooms she described bore no resemblance to medical facilities. Walls covered with symbols that seemed to shift when observed directly, painted in substances that gleamed with oily luminescence, even in darkness. Floors inscribed with geometric patterns that hurt to look at, creating optical illusions that made walking difficult. The restraint systems went far beyond medical immobilization. Margaret described elaborate constructions of metal and leather that held patients in positions designed to cause maximum psychological distress. Some restraints incorporated mechanical elements that moved independently, adjusting throughout procedures in response to vital signs. They would secure you for hours, Margaret recalled, but the restraints themselves were part of the treatment, applying pressure to specific points while forcing positions that created intense discomfort. Dr. Pemberton called it systematic nervous adjustment, but it felt like deliberate torture designed to break down resistance. The procedures defied medical explanation. Margaret witnessed treatments involving no recognizable instruments or conventional medications. Instead, the Pembertons relied on methods that combined primitive ritual with something far more sinister. Lydia would place her hands on a patient's forehead, Margaret testified, and the woman would begin convulsing as if electricity was passing through her body. But there were no electrical devices visible. The convulsions would continue for minutes while the patient's eyes rolled back and strange sounds emerged from her throat. Not words, but something like speaking in reverse. Margaret's most terrifying discovery was the fate of patients who failed to respond to standard treatments. These women were taken to the deepest underground levels. Chambers reached through passages so narrow they required crawling through spaces barely wide enough for human bodies. There were patients down there who had been undergoing treatment for months, maybe years, she whispered. They were kept in metal cages, suspended from the ceiling, connected to tubes and wires that pulsed with energy I couldn't identify. Still alive, but barely recognizable as human. Their skin had become translucent, and their eyes had changed color completely, a deep violet that seemed to glow in the darkness. Dr. Edmund Hartley of Harvard Medical School arrived in Brookfield in spring 1874 with a mandate to conduct scientific investigation of Dr. Pemberton's methods. Hartley brought impeccable credentials and an international reputation for rational analysis of unexplained phenomena. The initial meeting between the two doctors appeared cordial. Dr. Pemberton readily agreed to provide complete access to facilities and patient records, though he requested certain procedures be observed from a distance to protect patient privacy. Dr. Hartley's first examination revealed a sophisticated medical facility exceeding most hospital standards. Treatment rooms were immaculately clean, equipped with finest instruments, and organized with serious professional competence. Patient records were meticulously maintained with impressive thoroughness. However, subtle anomalies began troubling Dr. Hartley immediately. Patient outcomes were simply too consistent to be credible. Legitimate treatment typically showed variable results with partial successes, relapses, and treatment-resistant cases. Dr. Pemberton's records documented success rates approaching 90% with virtually no complications. More disturbing were the personality changes described in follow-up reports. Women treated by Dr. Pemberton underwent complete personality reconstruction, emerging as entirely different individuals with no connection to their previous selves. I have never encountered medical interventions achieving such comprehensive behavioral modification, Dr. Hartley wrote. The documented changes suggest not treatment of existing conditions, but fundamental alteration of personality structure itself. Dr. Hartley's investigation took a disturbing turn when he examined the underground levels. Despite claims these areas contained only storage and mechanical systems, he discovered treatment facilities bearing no resemblance to legitimate medical practice. The restraint systems particularly troubled his scientific sensibilities. While designed to immobilize patients completely, they incorporated features intended to induce psychological stress rather than facilitate procedures. Some included sensory deprivation elements, others delivered measured amounts of pain, and the most elaborate systems maintained patients in sustained terror for extended periods. The breakthrough that fundamentally changed Dr. Hartley's perspective came during his third week, when Dr. Pemberton finally permitted him to observe an actual treatment session. What he witnessed challenged every principle of medical science he had ever accepted. The patient began exhibiting symptoms I can only describe as supernatural manifestation, Dr. Hartley recorded. Her body temperature dropped to levels that should have induced unconsciousness, yet she remained alert. Her pulse became irregular, following patterns corresponding to external influences I could not identify. During the procedure, the Pemberton family arranged themselves around the restrained patient in a formation Dr. Hartley recognized from occult practices. They began reciting phrases in what sounded like Latin, though the pronunciation was unlike any classical usage. She began speaking in voices that were not her own, Dr. Hartley documented, not multiple personalities sometimes observed in hysteria, but distinctly different voices seeming to come from outside her body entirely. Some spoke in unrecognizable languages, others communicated bypassing spoken language altogether, conveying meaning directly to consciousness. Most horrifying was realizing the treatment was not being performed on the patient, but through her. The young woman had become a conduit for communication with entities existing beyond normal perception. Dr. Hartley's assistant, Robert Blackwood, witnessed this procedure against explicit instructions. That night, he was found having suffered psychological breakdown, repeating, "They're not human. They never were human. They're wearing human shapes, but they're not human." 4 nights later, Blackwood disappeared from his locked room, leaving only clothes arranged in a neat pile. His body was found in the deepest treatment rooms, positions suggesting he had been conducting ritual before death from causes conventional medicine couldn't explain. The events that would finally expose the full horror began on November 13, 1876, when multiple witnesses throughout Brookfield reported phenomena that could no longer be dismissed. What occurred represented an escalation attracting attention far beyond the local community. The first signs appeared at sunset, when usual evening sounds were replaced by unnatural silence that seemed to press against eardrums like physical weight. This silence emanated from the Pemberton estate, spreading outward in waves encompassing increasingly larger areas as darkness fell. As full darkness settled, silence was replaced by something far more disturbing. A low vibration began emanating from beneath the ground, felt rather than heard, causing windows to rattle and making livestock restless. The vibration followed a regular rhythm, like a massive heartbeat, pulsing with increasing intensity. Dr. Hartley's instruments began registering readings exceeding their calibrated ranges. The electromagnetic disturbances are unlike anything in scientific literature, he recorded. The readings suggest energy expenditures requiring industrial-scale power generation, yet the estate has no systems capable of producing such output. Visual phenomena began around 10 o'clock, when lights started appearing in the sky above the estate, luminous formations moving with obvious intelligence. Witnesses described geometric patterns of light that shifted in ways that hurt to observe directly, creating optical effects inducing vertigo in anyone watching for extended periods. Around midnight, witnesses reported seeing figures moving across the estate grounds, not normal human movement, but forms that seemed to glide rather than walk, traveling in straight lines regardless of terrain, and occasionally disappearing into the earth before emerging elsewhere. The climax came around 3 o'clock, when underground vibrations suddenly ceased and were replaced by a roar from the depths of the earth itself, so deep and powerful it was felt as much as heard, causing buildings to shake and animals to flee in panic. Following this roar, lights above the estate intensified to a degree turning night into day across the township. The illumination revealed details normally invisible to human perception, allowing witnesses to see the estate's underground chambers through the earth itself, as if solid ground had become transparent. What they saw would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. The underground complex stretched for miles in all directions, containing hundreds of treatment rooms connected by passages forming geometric patterns. In these chambers, they could see dozens of patients suspended in indescribable apparatus, connected to machinery pulsing with the same rhythm as earlier vibrations. Most horrifying were entities moving through underground passages, forms clearly not human despite roughly humanoid shape, beings composed of the same luminous energy providing supernatural illumination. These entities directed procedures on human subjects, manipulating controls suggesting technological sophistication far beyond anything available in the 1870s. The supernatural illumination lasted exactly 17 minutes, during which every detail of the estate's true nature was visible to witnesses throughout the region. When lights finally faded, they left behind a scene of complete devastation that would take investigators weeks to fully comprehend. When dawn broke on November 14, 1876, the Pemberton estate lay in ruins that defied conventional explanation. The mansion itself appeared structurally intact from a distance, but closer inspection revealed damage that seemed to emanate from within the building itself. Windows had shattered outward, walls showed stress fractures that followed no recognizable pattern, and the roof had partially collapsed in sections that corresponded to the underground chambers revealed during the night's supernatural illumination. Federal marshals arrived from Boston within hours of receiving Sheriff Hawthorne's urgent telegrams, accompanied by military engineers and medical personnel who had been briefed to expect evidence of industrial accidents or explosive mishaps. What they discovered instead challenged every assumption about the case and prompted immediate implementation of extraordinary security measures. The underground complex was far more extensive than even the previous night's revelations had suggested. Military surveyors mapping the subterranean passages discovered tunnels extending for over 15 miles in multiple directions, connecting to natural cave systems and man-made chambers that appeared to predate the Pemberton estate by centuries. Some passages descended to depths exceeding 200 feet, reaching geological strata that shouldn't have been accessible through conventional excavation methods. The treatment rooms contained evidence of procedures that military physicians refused to document in their official reports. Restraint systems had been twisted into impossible configurations. Surgical instruments were embedded in stone walls, as if the metal had become liquid before re-solidifying, and organic materials of unknown origin covered surfaces throughout the complex. Most disturbing of all, several chambers contained what appeared to be human remains that had been transformed in ways that challenged anatomical understanding. The fate of the patients who had been undergoing treatment at the time of the incident became a matter of urgent federal concern. Of the 43 women documented as residing at the estate, only 12 were found alive, and their condition raised questions that military physicians were unprepared to address. These survivors displayed physical and psychological characteristics that seemed to represent various stages of the transformation processes witnessed during the supernatural illumination. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the first female physician to examine the survivors, documented changes that she initially refused to believe were possible. Several patients display skeletal modifications that should be incompatible with survival, she wrote in classified reports later sealed by federal authorities. Bone density has increased to levels approaching metallic hardness, joint flexibility has been enhanced beyond normal human ranges, and neurological responses suggest fundamental alterations to brain structure and function. More troubling still were the psychological evaluations. The surviving patients demonstrated cognitive abilities that seemed to fluctuate between profound impairment and superhuman intelligence. Some could solve complex mathematical problems that challenged trained engineers, while simultaneously being unable to recognize their own reflections or remember their names. Others displayed knowledge of scientific principles decades ahead of current understanding, while speaking in languages that linguists couldn't identify. The most disturbing discovery was that several survivors appeared to be sharing consciousness across multiple bodies. During interviews, patients would begin sentences that others would complete, respond to questions addressed to different individuals, and demonstrate awareness of events they hadn't personally witnessed. Federal investigators initially suspected some form of elaborate deception, but extensive testing confirmed that the phenomenon was genuine and apparently irreversible. Government response to the Pemberton incident was swift and comprehensive. Within 48 hours of the initial discovery, the entire estate was classified as a federal security zone under military jurisdiction. All physical evidence was confiscated and transported to undisclosed locations for analysis by specialists with appropriate security clearances. Local witnesses were interviewed extensively and required to sign confidentiality agreements backed by severe legal penalties for disclosure. The official cover story characterized the incident as an industrial accident involving experimental chemical processes that had resulted in toxic contamination of the estate grounds. This explanation satisfied most public curiosity while providing justification for the extensive security measures and ongoing federal presence in Brookfield. Local newspapers were persuaded to limit their coverage through a combination of patriotic appeals and subtle economic pressure. The surviving patients presented the most serious challenge to containment efforts. Their condition made conventional medical treatment impossible, and their altered capabilities posed potential security risks if they were released into general society. After extensive deliberation, federal authorities decided to transfer them to specialized facilities where they could receive appropriate care while remaining isolated from public contact. These facilities, officially designated as Specialized Medical Research Centers, were established in remote locations throughout the Western Territories. The patients were distributed among multiple sites to prevent any possibility of their unusual, shared consciousness expanding or developing in unexpected directions. Family members requesting information about their transferred relatives were told that the women were receiving cutting-edge treatment for rare psychological conditions and that contact was temporarily prohibited to avoid disrupting their recovery. The Pemberton family members themselves had vanished completely during the night of the incident. Extensive searches of the estate and surrounding area found no trace of Dr. Cornelius Pemberton, Eleanor, Marcus, Miriam, or Lydia. Their personal quarters appeared to have been abandoned in haste, with valuable possessions left behind and clothing scattered as if the occupants had fled with only the items they could carry. However, evidence suggested that their disappearance had been planned well in advance. Hidden chambers throughout the mansion contained packed travel supplies, false identity documents, and substantial quantities of gold and silver that could be easily transported. Bank records revealed that the family had been gradually liquidating their assets for months prior to the incident, converting their wealth into forms that would be useful for extended travel or permanent relocation. International investigations attempted to track the fugitive family members through diplomatic channels and intelligence networks, but these efforts proved largely unsuccessful. Reported sightings came from locations as diverse as Mexico, Canada, and various European countries, but none could be confirmed through reliable sources. The family appeared to have access to resources and connections that enabled them to disappear completely from official observation. More disturbing were reports from remote areas suggesting that the Pemberton family might be continuing their work under different identities. Isolated communities in several countries reported the arrival of sophisticated medical practitioners offering treatments for conditions that local physicians couldn't address. While these reports couldn't be definitively connected to the Pembertons, the described methods and remarkable success rates bore suspicious similarities to the techniques documented at the Massachusetts estate. The long-term impact on Brookfield itself was profound and lasting. Despite official assurances that the area was safe following extensive decontamination efforts, many residents chose to relocate rather than remain in proximity to the former estate. Property values throughout the region declined significantly, and the town's population dropped by nearly 40% within 2 years of the incident. Those who remained often reported ongoing unusual phenomena that suggested the estate's influence hadn't been completely eliminated. Residents described persistent electromagnetic disturbances that affected compass readings and interfered with telegraphic communications. Some claimed to hear faint sounds emanating from the sealed underground complex, while others reported seeing lights moving through the abandoned mansion's windows, despite the building being under constant military guard. Nearly 150 years have passed since federal authorities sealed the Pemberton estate and classified all related documentation as matters of national security. Modern science has achieved miracles that would have seemed impossible to 19th century observers. We have split atoms, mapped human DNA, and sent machines to explore distant planets. Yet the fundamental questions raised by the Pemberton case remain as troubling and unanswered today as they were to the investigators who first confronted them in 1876. Contemporary neuroscience has advanced to the point where we can observe individual neurons firing in living brains. But we still cannot explain how the Pemberton family achieved the comprehensive personality modifications documented in their patient records. Modern physics has revealed the quantum nature of reality and the strange behaviors of subatomic particles, yet we have no theoretical framework that could account for the energy phenomena witnessed during the November incident. Perhaps most disturbing of all, recent declassification of government documents has revealed that the Pemberton case was not unique. Similar incidents involving unexplained scientific capabilities and apparent contact with non-human intelligences have been documented throughout American history, always followed by the same pattern of federal intervention, evidence suppression, and public memory modification that characterized the official response to the Massachusetts estate. These revelations raise profound questions about the nature of human knowledge and the boundaries of scientific understanding. If the phenomena documented at the Pemberton estate were genuine, and the physical evidence suggests they were, then our fundamental assumptions about reality may be fundamentally flawed. The entities observed during the supernatural illumination appeared to possess technologies and capabilities that suggest intelligence far exceeding human achievement, operating according to principles that our science cannot begin to comprehend. The ethical implications are equally troubling. The Pemberton family's research, however horrific in its methods, appears to have achieved results that mainstream science would not accomplish for decades or centuries. Their ability to modify human consciousness, enhance physical capabilities, and establish communication with non-human intelligences represents knowledge that could revolutionize our understanding of existence itself. Yet this knowledge was obtained through systematic torture and experimentation on unwilling subjects, raising fundamental questions about the relationship between scientific progress and moral responsibility. Modern bioethics and human rights legislation were largely developed in response to atrocities committed during the 20th century. But the Pemberton case suggests that similar violations may have been occurring throughout human history, hidden behind facades of respectability and legitimate research. How many other cases like the Pemberton estate remain buried in classified archives? How many apparent advances in medical knowledge might have been achieved through methods that violated every principle of human dignity? The survivors of the Pemberton estate, if any still live, would now be well over 150 years old, far beyond normal human lifespan. Yet classified reports suggest that some of the transformed patients displayed characteristics that might have significantly extended their natural lifespans. The possibility that these individuals might still exist, possessing knowledge and capabilities that could transform human civilization, represents both an extraordinary opportunity and a terrifying threat. Government authorities have maintained their official silence about the Pemberton case for nearly a century and a half, citing national security concerns and public safety considerations. This secrecy raises its own troubling questions about the relationship between citizens and their government, the nature of democratic accountability, and the right of people to know the truth about their own history and the reality of their world. The technological capabilities displayed at the Pemberton estate, energy generation without recognizable power sources, consciousness transfer between multiple bodies, and communication with non-human intelligences suggest possibilities that could address many of humanity's most pressing challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, and the limitations of human biological capabilities might all be addressable through knowledge derived from understanding the phenomena documented in Massachusetts. Yet the same capabilities that could benefit humanity also represent potential tools for control and manipulation that dwarf any previous instruments of oppression. The ability to modify human consciousness at will, to transform bodies according to desired specifications, and to establish contact with intelligences possessing superior knowledge could create unprecedented opportunities for those who controlled such technologies to dominate those who didn't. The Pemberton case ultimately confronts us with fundamental questions about the nature of progress, the price of knowledge, and the responsibilities that come with power over the basic structures of reality. The family's research methods were unquestionably monstrous, but their results suggest that our current understanding of science, consciousness, and human potential may be painfully limited. As we continue advancing into an era where genetic engineering, artificial intelligence, and quantum computing are pushing the boundaries of what we consider possible, The Pemberton legacy serves as both inspiration and warning. The pursuit of knowledge without ethical constraints can lead to horrors that challenge our understanding of human nature itself. Yet the deliberate suppression of knowledge, however well-intentioned, may deprive humanity of insights that could transform our species for the better. The question that haunts every serious examination of the Pemberton case is not whether such phenomena are possible, the evidence strongly suggests they are, but whether humanity is mature enough to handle the implications of that possibility. Are we prepared to confront the reality that our understanding of existence may be fundamentally incomplete? Can we pursue knowledge that could revolutionize human civilization while maintaining the ethical principles that define our humanity? The answers to these questions remain as elusive today as they were to the terrified investigators who first witnessed the supernatural illumination above the Pemberton estate. But the questions themselves may be the most important legacy of that November night in 1876. A reminder that the pursuit of truth, however necessary, always carries risks that extend far beyond the investigators who dare to seek it. What do you think lies buried in the classified archives of our government? How many other cases like the Pemberton estate remain hidden from public knowledge? And perhaps most importantly, if such knowledge exists, do we have the right to know about it, regardless of the consequences? The shadows of history hold secrets that powerful institutions have decided we're not ready to know. But ready or not, the truth has a way of eventually emerging into the light. The question is whether we'll be prepared to face it when it does.